Today we are going to be talking about three different artists who can be categorized as tortured artists or eccentric souls. We will be exploring one piece in depth for each artist and discussing the elements and principles of design used in each piece. We will also briefly explore the tortured artist trope.
What is a tortured artist? The trope refers to the possible link between torment and art. There have been many studies that attempt to prove or disprove the connection between the two with opposing outcomes. Many of the studies looking for a link between creativity and mental illness rely heavily on small, highly specialized samples with strong dependence on subjective accounts. Whether or not there is a link between suffering and art is still debatable. However, the trope is still prevalent in popular culture and is worth exploring further.
William Blake was part of the Romanticism movement in the mid-1700s. Romantic artists glorified things. They were rarely physical in nature, but instead concepts such as liberty, survival, hope, awe, and various other natural sensations. They romanticized things on a subjective level, as opposed to a literal one. He was a poet and artist in London. He was known for supposedly being visited by spirits of dead kings and artists. Blake would detail conversations he had with these spirits, as though they really happened. The piece The Ghost of a Flea was inspired by a spiritual visit with the ghost of a flea, and painted in tempera on wood panel. The painting's subject is a grotesque, human-like monster holding a cup full of blood. The figure appears to be walking through a corridor framed by curtains, with stars in the background sky. The colors are dark and muted, save for the gold highlights. The being appears to be sneaking about and is generally terrifying. The colors, pose, and facial expression all work together to create a sinister mood. This terrifying piece is one of Blake's smallest paintings, and makes us curious about what he really saw. William Blake was revolutionary for his criticism of the Bible and Christ himself. While still being technically Christian, he did not follow the rigid morality taught by the Bible and culture surrounding it.
Fast forward to the 1800s, past Impressionism and on to Post-Impressionism. We land at Vincent van Gogh. Impressionism as an art movement rejected the way that most artists created their polished pieces, instead attempting to capture what one might see with an eye's glance at a subject. Vincent van Gogh became an impressionist painter after moving to Paris and meeting artists who influenced his style. Van Gogh is one of the most famous tortured artists, as he struggled with mood swings and was in and out of mental institutions for much of his later life. The piece Window in the Studio was painted while Van Gogh was staying in a mental institution in Saint Remy. There he was provided an extra room to use as a studio, which became his subject for his painting. Van Gogh used line to create contour shapes in his work Window in the Studio. The form in the painting had minimal shading. The use of color mixed bright, warm colors with cool colors to create a contrast. Many believe his use of bright colors were to counteract the depressive episodes he faced in life. The painting is made up in oil and uses a technique called impasto, which means paste or mixture in Italian. The technique involved heavy brush strokes and lots of paint to the point where the bristles of the brush would imprint onto the canvas. It is highly debated exactly what mental illnesses Van Gogh suffered from. He was not recognized in his time, but is now seen as one of the greatest Western painters because of his use of color especially.
Finally, let's explore the life of Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo was a Mexican artist who is known for her colorful self-portraits depicting physical and emotional pain. Her style has widely been described as surrealism, which is a style of art and literature developed in the 20th century that stresses the subconscious, unconscious, and dreams, the significance of imagery and symbolism, and uses unexpected juxtapositions of objects. But Frida rejected this label as a surrealist, stating that, quote, "I don't paint dreams or nightmares. I paint my own reality. The only thing I know is that I paint because I need to, and I paint whatever passes through my head." End quote. Kahlo suffered from health issues all her life. Starting at the age of 6, she developed polio, which permanently thinned and shortened her right leg, which she later covered with long dresses and skirts. When she was 18 years old, she was in a horrible accident when the bus she was on crashed into a streetcar. An iron handrail from the bus impaled her left hip and exited through her vagina, fracturing her spine and pelvis in several places. She survived the trauma and started painting while recovering in a body cast. Her work captures the pain she continued to feel for the course of her life, both physical and emotional, and presents it in a way that is expressively communicative and vulnerable. The piece Henry Ford Hospital expresses both types of pain and was painted by Kahlo in 1932, shortly after her second miscarriage. It depicts Frida's naked, hemorrhaging body twisted on a hospital bed in an arid landscape, with the industrial city of Detroit visible in the background. Frida is holding 6 red ribbons, commonly interpreted as umbilical cords, that are attached to 6 different symbolic objects floating around her. The objects, starting from the top left to moving clockwise, are a pink orthopedic cast of the pelvic zone, alluding to her fractured spine, a male fetus, which is a representation of the child she just lost, a snail, which Kahlo said represented the slowness of her abortion, a pelvic bone, alluding to another fracture received during the accident, an orchid, commonly interpreted as a uterus, and an autoclave, which is an instrument used to sterilize medical utensils, representing her infertility. She uses a flat plane that is far away from the city to create a feeling of isolation and disconnection from society during her time of grief. The careful spacing of objects around Frida creates a sense of balance, and the appearance of floating gives the piece a melancholic movement, loosely tethered and restrained to her by the ribbons. Frida Kahlo's work gives us a unique insight and interpretation of physical and emotional pain from a woman's perspective, and she is regarded as an important figure in Mexican culture, feminism, and disability awareness.
These 3 artists capture different types of suffering and present them in their own unique way. While stress and trauma may not be directly linked with creativity, it is possible to draw from one's trauma and use it as fuel for artistic expression. This is not to say that adversity is required for artistic expression, but it can be used as a form of healing and reconciliation with oneself. William Blake used art to show his terrifying psychosis in a physical way, perhaps to give relief from what he saw in his mind, or to explain it to those around him. Van Gogh used his art as a coping mechanism, saving him from himself if only for a little while. Frida Kahlo used metaphors and symbolism to express her truth and show that there is strength in vulnerability. No matter why these artists made art, expressing what they needed to is what is really important. We can learn from all of these artists and incorporate the ways they expressed their suffering into our own artistic pursuits.